Hello and welcome to episode 96 of the PA Path podcast. Our guest today is Dr. Emily WhiteHorse, who has over 40 years of experience in education, starting as a high school teacher before becoming a PA. In addition to 13 years of clinical practice, she has been in PA education for over 28 years, holding positions as an associate program director, didactic coordinator, clinical coordinator, and faculty member. Dr. WhiteHorse has successfully worked as a PA educational consultant for 14 years, helping new and existing programs with accreditation, curriculum, and assessment design. In 2019, she founded the PA Faculty Development Academy, which offers online courses to those teaching in PA education. She also authors a bi-monthly newsletter, the PA Educator, reflecting her ongoing passion for helping clinicians successfully transition to education. She continues to provide faculty development to PA programs all across the country, and we are excited to talk to Dr. WhiteHorse today about her new textbook titled Becoming a PA Educator, a practical guide for physician assistant associate faculty, which is now available through Amazon and other booksellers. Emily, thanks so much for joining us. We're really excited to reconnect with you and also talk about this incredible book that you have authored that is so timely given the influx of programs that are expanding and all of the faculty that we're trying to hire to fill these new developing programs, and even the ones that have been around forever. We have so many folks that are transitioning from their clinical role, like all of us did at one point, to an academic role as a PA educator. And we're excited to highlight this book and really dig deep on how effective this can be. Let's start, though, with our usual question for the podcast, because you've been a PA for a long time and love to highlight your career. So can you talk about your path to becoming a PA first?
Sure. First, I want to say thank you to both you and Stephanie for inviting me to the podcast. My first career was a health and physical education teacher. And as an athlete, I was fascinated by the human body, but also about health and well-being. And so while I was in undergrad school, I also studied and became a nationally certified athletic trainer. During that time, I was also an EMT for 6 years, running an ambulance. And then I started working at a high school, and I was their only athletic trainer. I was teaching, and I was also the athletic trainer. And I was responsible for about 400 athletes per season for 7 years. And after that point, I looked around and said, I really want to do more than I can do as a trainer. And when I sent somebody off to be evaluated, I wanted to go and see what the orthopod was saying. If they had to get x-rays, I wanted to look at the x-rays. And if they wanted to add that surgery, I wanted to be in on that surgery. And so I, for some odd reason, decided that I would pursue being a podiatrist. So I had to get some prereqs. I was in an organic chemistry course in the summer, and I ran into a PA who was in the course because he was looking to go on to be a physician. And we got to talking, and he looked at me and said, everything you want to do, you can do as a PA. And I had known about PAs. I had come across them when I was in my undergrad work, because when I was doing my athletic training work, we'd take some of the athletes over to the hospital, and there were PAs in that hospital. So that's how I knew about them a little bit. So after that conversation, spending that summer with Dennis and struggling through organic chem, I made the decision to pursue PA instead of podiatry.
So tell us about your path then through PA school and into your clinical career.
So I was orthopedics all the way. I was sports medicine, orthopedics all the way. When I did my surgery rotation, I actually fell in love with surgery. I fell in love with general surgery, and I was hired by my preceptor. It was the first PA in that hospital, hired as a first assist for anything that came in the door. And so I started in general surgery. I spent 2 years in general surgery and then eventually moved into orthopedics. I worked in both hospital settings and private office settings. I also spent about 2 years in occupational medicine. And throughout the 13 years of my clinical work, I always kept taking call for general surgery. So I always kept doing it, anything from craniotomies to C-sections. I just kept doing it. So that's really where I spent most of my time, was surgery. I just loved it.
So the premise of our conversation today is really about your new textbook that you have authored, Becoming a PA Educator, a Practical Guide for Physician Assistant Associate Faculty. So let's talk about your transition, because knowing you as long as I have, we've talked about this topic many times in the office, and that transition is not easy, right? I think we often see clinicians, including even myself when I first became an educator, saying, oh, this is going to be easy compared to clinical practice, but it's an entirely different set of skills. So what was that like for you? And is this probably one of those key reasons that drove you towards faculty development as well?
Yeah. So for me, moving into education wasn't really a transition. It was as much as it was a coming back home for me to teaching and education. Unlike teaching high school, teaching PAs and PA education granted me the opportunity to help shape the next generation of PAs and to contribute to our profession. So my first love is and always has been teaching. I was one of those individuals who knew from elementary school that I wanted to be a teacher. And 5 years after becoming a PA and working clinically as a PA, the call to return to teaching resurfaced. And there was a new program that opened near me, and I reached out to the program director. And then for the next 8 years, I worked clinically in general and orthopedic surgery. And then I also worked as a faculty member in that program. And since I was formally trained as a teacher and had worked as a teacher, I noticed the challenges and frustrations faced by my clinical colleagues as they were transitioning to being a faculty member and being in education. And I became passionate about trying to help them understand their new role and responsibility as a teacher. This led me to becoming one of the teaching members of the PAEA faculty development workshops, the new faculty, the basic skills workshops for 8 years, and then to my work and eventually taking on the chair of the education committee for the annual conference. So I worked for 8 years at that program. I left in 2003 to move to the West Coast, where I continued to be fully engaged in PA education and slowly moved into leadership positions, director of didactic, director of clinical, associate program director. And although I continued to focus on helping faculty make that transition wherever I was still very much focused on teaching students. And then in 2010, I shifted gears and started to work as a consultant. And although what I actually did was I reached out to those programs that were looking for faculty that were short faculty. And what I did was I just offered to step in for as long as they need me, doing whatever they needed me to do until they could hire somebody full time to fill that position. And so that's what I did. And it was during that time that I started to realize how significant the PA faculty shortage was. And part of what contributed to that shortage was the high number of clinicians that would come into education only to leave and return to clinical practice within 3 years or less. I also realized that part of that was because these new faculty needed mentorship, along with formal and ongoing faculty development to nurture and support them during this transition. As I traveled all over the country working in PA programs, this pattern became very concerning to me because I have long believed that the competency and longevity of our profession rests on the knowledge, quality, and skills of those of us who teach. As a profession, we need to find ways to develop and support and keep faculty in our programs to teach the next generation of our profession. If we don't, it could have devastating effects on our profession's future. This became my passion. And I slowly began to move away from teaching students to focusing on teaching new faculty. And my work as a consultant became more about faculty development and teaching curriculum design and assessment and helping programs understand accreditation and providing some of the basic foundational principles of education and teaching so faculty didn't feel so lost. So this led to my PhD dissertation topic to explore the experiences of new PA faculty with 3 or fewer years experience to understand the challenges and frustrations they felt and what factors affected their early experience, both positive and negative. So once again, I got to travel around the country and interview new faculty and listen to their concerns. And at the time, this was in 2016, the PA data showed that the majority of faculty had been in PA education for 3 or fewer years. The majority of faculty had been 3 or fewer years. This data was concerning because it showed that folks were not staying in education positions long term. We were creating a significant faculty turnover problem. And also, we weren't effectively creating a cohort of well-seasoned, experienced educators needed to guide and mentor the new faculty. In many places where I went and worked, there was new faculty mentoring even newer faculty. And as you mentioned earlier, Kevin, the explosion of PA programs just continued to compound the problem, right? As institutions and programs have struggled to identify, recruit, and retain faculty. We all know the majority of PA faculty come directly from clinical practice. And data from our own profession continues to show that they have no formal training or experience in education or teaching when they accept a faculty position. And program directors continue to identify the lack of qualified, available, trained faculty to hire as a barrier to filling open positions, right? All of this served to reinforce the growing commitment I had to try to find a way to help new faculty in their positions, to provide them with the support and basic knowledge about education and teaching directly related to their role and responsibility as a faculty member in a PA program. So my goal was to help them better understand what it means to be in academia and to be a teacher, in addition to being a clinician. One of my goals has been to try and address this by providing faculty development, which eventually laid out the foundation of the PA Faculty Development Academy in the fall of 2019 to provide online courses for faculty to help them make that transition more successfully. And then I started writing the bi-monthly newsletter, the PA Educator, because that was another way for me to try to put information out there to help folks just understand education and teaching. It's different. Look, the reality is, even in clinical practice, we're supposed to stay up on the medical research. We're supposed to keep reading. And how many of us have time to do that, right? Even as clinicians. Now you've just added another whole set of information that faculty need to read. In addition to staying up clinically, now they need to start reading the educational research, right? So now we've just loaded on another whole profession of knowledge and skills that they're supposed to read. And the reality is, we all know, faculty are overwhelmed and exhausted, whether you're experienced or not. And so trying to say to them, now you have to read the educational literature. So I just felt I'll read it and I'll push out there in a newsletter. At least then it's easier to read and take in. And if they want to pursue it more, they can. So all of this over the past 28 years that I've been in PA education kind of all culminated into solidifying my passion and commitment to trying to make a difference, to finding ways to support and educate new faculty, focusing on helping clinicians successfully transition to education so that they're more likely to stay. And all of the years of doing this sat me down in this chair to write the book.
This is such a needed resource, I think, among the PA education community, and I'm thrilled that this is going to be available. And I think that there's a big misperception when you talk to people who have made the transition from clinician to educator. There's the phase of time where they think they know what education looks like, and then there's this sudden realization once they step into the education world where they realize what they thought, a pretty far departure from what education really is and what it requires, and the learning curve into really being an effective educator. So in your book, you start by discussing the transition from clinician to educator, making that jump. Why is it, do you think, that transition is so challenging for many of those who make it?
I think you already alluded to part of it. It's a mismatch of expectations, right? So what's been my experience is that in higher education, we work from this model of teacher, a practitioner. And so in higher education, we believe that if you want to be an MBA, then we're going to hire MBAs who are out there working as MBAs to teach the next generation of MBAs. And that model doesn't work a lot of the time, because while you may know what the profession is and what to do in the profession and how to be and work and thrive in the profession, that's not the same as teaching the profession, right? Teaching what it is that you need to know. So the analogy that I use a lot of times is the concept in our society that if somebody's a great athlete, we assume they're going to be a great coach. And that's not a good assumption. Sometimes it works, but a lot of times it doesn't. And so it's the same thing here, is that as PA, your experience is you're thinking, I've worked X number of years as a PA. I know what PAs are all about. I know what we do in clinical practice. I know what to expect. And then they came through a PA program and they're like, they sat in a chair and watched people come in and lecture to them, or they did labs. And they're like, how hard could this be? I can do this. I know what a PA needs to know. And then they hit their first job. And so I think that part of the work that needs to happen, in my opinion, is at the front end of this, before somebody actually signs on the line to become a faculty member, is to really communicate that it's not what they think it is. Or even to say, what do you think your life will be like as a faculty member? Because the reality is, most people that come into education do so because they enjoy teaching. They enjoy working with the students, whether it's in a lab, whether it's in front of the classroom, whether it's helping them in a clinical reasoning group, whatever it is. That's what lights faculty up, right? That's what they enjoy. And the sad part is that's one of the smallest pieces of what we do, which is a shame in some regard. But that's the reality of it. And I think that's a big disconnect for faculty. So I think that trying to get ahead of that mismatch of expectations, and I'll tell you, and I did this with Kevin when we hired folks, we'd sit and try to say, what do you think a day in the life of a PA faculty looks like? And even though we'd have them do that, when we'd hire them, they'd still sit in my office and say, where have I just landed? What am I doing? I come here all day and I don't feel like I get anything done. And I go home and I have all this work to do. And I'm working at night and I'm working on the weekends. So I think that's part of the challenge, is that clinicians don't realize that when they decide to step into education, they are stepping into another whole profession, another whole career that is a field in and of itself, separate from medicine. And so that field has its own knowledge, its own skills. And I think that there's the misperception that they are not stepping into another field. One of the things I talk about briefly in the book is about second career teachers, which I think PAs, I found this when I was doing my doctorate, is that there's a lot of people that work in a field that's unrelated to teaching, but part of their being is that they love to teach. And at some point in their life, they decide to make the turn and go into doing something that allows them to teach. And I thought that's what PA educators are. They're people that started in the clinical field in medicine with that focus and decided at some point that they really wanted to teach. And they become second career teachers, meaning that what they did before, all their knowledge and skills, doesn't have a whole lot of transference into the new role. But I think that's where disconnect.
I wonder, Emily, because I remember very clearly as an internal medicine PA, I was in an ICU room explaining to a patient who happened to be a physicist, a really intelligent person, but not well informed in the electrophysiology of the heart. And I remember spending 10 minutes with him, drawing out a picture of the heart and drawing the conduction process of the electrical physiologic signal to the heart cells, and explaining why this person was having ectopic heartbeats related to propagation of signals from other aspects of the atrium or the ventricles. And then I walked out and there's a cardiologist sitting at the nurse's station who said, wow, that was like going back to medical school. That was so much fun. And I think that was one of the like aha moments for me, that we teach patients all the time. But I think the biggest challenge for me, and I'm still learning even 20 years later, is really constructing like a strong set of assessments that are aligned with the instructional objectives that I've developed, that are aligned to the learning outcomes, that are aligned to the program-defined competencies, that hopefully are aligned to the accreditation standards. So there's this whole nother kind of train of thought that in order to be fair to the students and giving them the best opportunity to succeed, we have to be really clear in how that all lines up. Can you talk a little bit about how your textbook really educates the learner that's reading from you how to do that and why it's so important?
Yeah, I think you explained that really well. There is the assumption by clinicians that come into PA faculty roles that teaching patients is the same as being a faculty member. And the other thing is that a lot of folks, in my experience, a lot of the folks that I spoke to had decided to take a full-time PA faculty position because the best part of their clinical job was being a preceptor. And so they equate the teaching with, oh, I know I'm going to love being in PA education. And so there's a little bit of a disconnect. That absolutely is teaching. There's no doubt about it. But Kevin, to your point, that's the piece that there's so much more to teaching than just being able to sit down and really explain the electroconductivity of the heart, right? It's so much bigger than that. And that speaks to another big piece of the disconnect and the concept that new faculty need to recognize they are stepping into a totally new field. And that field of education requires this alignment to happen. Because at the end of the day, as teachers, our job is to ensure that students have learned what we need them to learn, especially in medical education or PA education, right? Not to diminish any other forms of education, but we ultimately have a responsibility to the patients that these students are going to see. The book is broken into 4 parts, and the biggest part is the 3rd section that really dives into trying to explain the importance of that alignment, that the decisions that you make from what you include in your lecture to what you put in your syllabus to what's on the exam, all of it has to be put together with intention and attention in order to make sure that your curriculum, of which is made up of all of the courses, both didactic and clinical, fits together in this intricate web that ultimately, by the time the student graduates, they have amassed everything you wanted them to learn. And I think that in my experience, a lot of programs that I've worked with, they didn't start there. Their curriculum didn't start there. And so it's always like playing catch up. And that makes the workload harder, right? So in the book, as best as I can, because this isn't something that you get the first time around. And Kevin, you and I know that because we went round and round lots of times about helping the faculty understand this concept of what's an outcome and how do you write one effectively. And then there's the instructional objectives. Those 2 things in and of themselves, faculty would rather run for the hills than have to learn that stuff and write it. And that's where I live. I love that stuff because it's the foundation of what we do. I go over each of those pieces and do the best that I can in the book to try to make those connections for the person reading the book. But like anything, a book is words on a page. They have to practice it. Mastery comes with practice and trial and error. And it takes time. And if you're working in a program where things are not connected, it's even more challenging. The book has not come out yet, and I will be curious to see if I was effective in trying to communicate that as best as I could on the written page. It's one thing to sit with somebody over and over again and work with their syllabi and review their learning outcomes and tweak them and help them understand and help them make the connection. And which assessment do you pick that will actually measure what it is that you said the students needed to learn? That takes time. I don't know that a book will do that, but I'm just hoping at least it's a place to start.
I think this book is going to be an incredible resource for not only PAs who are just maybe toying with the idea of moving into an education role, as well as to be used by programs when they're onboarding new faculty. And frankly, I even think that PAs who are in education and have been in education for a while may likely have some things that they didn't know that they didn't know, and the book might be helpful for them as well. So I'm very much looking forward to seeing how this book is going to be used and applied. And I think you're right. The theories can be read on a page, but really the benefit comes when people are able to apply those things, usually over and over. Emily, before we close, we always like to give our guests an opportunity to give us some parting thoughts and maybe some parting wisdom. So as you think about your many years of experience of helping PAs transition into education and your theory and hopes around writing this book, what are some of your parting thoughts that you can share with our listeners?
This book is a culmination of all of my professional career years and my soul's commitment to do for others what my teachers did for me. Teaching's been my life. It's been my calling. And it's my sincere hope that new faculty discover their passion for teaching and for how amazing and humbling it is to be granted the opportunity every day to make a difference in someone's life by supporting and encouraging them to be the best that they can be, to be open, to learn, to grow, both as a person and a future PA. I wholeheartedly believe that as teachers, we have an amazing potential and an enormous responsibility to affect change in a positive way and to make a difference in the lives of our students, their patients, our profession, and healthcare. And every day we get to support and guide students towards realizing their dreams and aspirations and to prepare the next generation of PAs. As PA educators, our work is to ensure the quality and longevity of our profession by graduating competent, professional, and outstanding PAs. And in order to do that, we need to make sure that those who decide to teach have the support, guidance, and chance to become successful, excellent teachers. And that's the push behind why I do this.
Emily, this is really wonderful work. Steph and I had the privilege to read this ahead of time, and we both think it's going to be tremendously valuable to PA educators, even medical educators and other educators. There's principles in here that are effective for everybody. I know our audience is going to want to know when they can purchase it. Would you mind sharing with us when or where we might be able to track this down, and maybe share your website as well so they know how to track your other offerings that you provide?
Sure. The book is currently out. It was just published. Folks can go on Amazon and order the book. It's in print and digital form. And you can also order it through any digital format, such as Barnes & Nobles or Apple or any of those. It will be available eventually off my website, and that address is dremilywhitehorse.com.
Perfect. Emily, thank you so much, not only for taking time with us today, but for all you've done for PA education. It's a real privilege to work with you.
Thank you so much. This has been a privilege for me to spend this time with you and have the opportunity to talk about my passion.
We want to thank our guest, Dr. Emily WhiteHorse, for her time and for her dedication to the PA profession. Her new textbook is an outstanding resource that will help all of our clinicians transitioning to PA education, as well as other health professional educators that are looking for the basic concepts of being a great graduate school educator. It is now available through Amazon and other booksellers as well, or on her website at dremilywhitehorse.com. Tune in next time as we speak with PA leaders both nationally and internationally.